Here we are, it's Thursday. We know we got a quiz tomorrow, so I'm going to kind of go back through very quickly, and we'll talk about some words that we talked about last week, and we'll talk about words that we've talked about this week. We'll spend a little bit more time on symbiosis since that was just introduced yesterday. Then we're going to get to food chains and food webs. We're going to play a game so we can review for vocabulary, and honestly, by the time that comes, we'll be lining up at the door and heading on out to our other classes. So let's make this pretty quick. When I talk about ecosystems, all the living and non-living things, we have now changed that, right, Hayden? We're going to say all the biotic and abiotic factors in an area because that's what living and non-living things are. What does biotic mean? What does biotic mean, Maddox? Living things. What is abiotic then, Hayden? Non-living things. What are the 4 abiotic factors that we tested in the window, Brandon? Sun, soil, temperature, and water. If you say it in a different order than I do, it's not a big deal. There's not like some fancy order, but that just kind of flows for me. So we've talked about all these things. Again, biotic versus abiotic. Keep on moving on as we skip past some of this. Producers, consumers, and decomposers. What in the world are producers, and what do they do, Jesse? They are plants, and what do producers do that's so fantastic? They make their own food. Good job. Consumers, they do something like pretty fancy, Raina. What do? What do consumers do? I thought your hand was up. Oh, you know the answer to this. What do consumers do? Most of us in here just got doing this for breakfast. They eat. Consumers eat, but we have 3 types of consumers, and it depends on what they eat to depend on what type of consumer they are. Hunter, what are my 3 different consumers? Carnivore, herbivore, omnivore. What does a carnivore eat? What does a carnivore eat, Miguel? Meat. What does an herbivore eat, Veda? What does an omnivore eat, Collins? They eat plants and animals. Now, over at the sink in our little tub there, we have some decomposers. They still haven't done anything with that dead lizard y'all gave me, but what do decomposers do? What's their niche? What are they supposed to do, Judah? Break down dead things into good soil. They get all the minerals out, and they break it down and make it good soil. Some of that gets released into the atmosphere as well, which is kind of cool. We talked about individual. I know when I tell you guys, and we'll have a little bit of that today, some individual work, that means we're working by ourselves. So if you have an individual in an area, it's just one. If we have all of those members of a species, we have the population. Those are things that you guys have done very well with. And we watched a bunch of videos of tigers all over the place, but we learned that habitat is where an animal or a plant naturally lives and grows. And tigers aren't naturally in your living room unless that's something you have going on at your house. If so, let me know. I want to come over and see the tiger. I will not let it eat my pizza, I promise. That would be kind of neat to see. But we saw that mama tiger, right? Poor mama tiger out in the woods trying to take care of those 4 babies who just kept running around and falling down rocks. But that was their natural habitat, right? Community, pretty easy. All the living things, you guys have nailed that one. That one typically just comes up not as a question, but it's a word that they'll use inside of a question. So I don't want you to be like, I don't even know what that means. So we cover community. You guys have done a pretty good job at that. Predator versus prey. Predator versus prey, Gunner. Predator that hunts things for food. What's prey? The thing that's being hunted. And I see a wolf on your sweatshirt. Is that predator or prey? It's a predator. Apex predator, as a matter of fact, because there's not a whole lot of things out there hunting wolves, are there? Top of the line thing. All right. And we move on. Whoops. We've been using this word since last week because I kind of gave it to you ahead of time. But that word niche, or niche, as the British people say it. What is a niche? What does it do, Shayla? It's the organism's job, right? Bats have a job. They eat insects. Worms have a job. They decompose things. Zebras have a job. They eat grass, right? Lions have a job. They eat the zebras. All these animals have different jobs that they perform inside of the ecosystem to keep that ecosystem in balance. And I believe that was that for that one. So we'll pop over here to yesterday with symbiosis. Symbiosis, as we quickly review symbiosis. Now, we learned if you break down the word symbiosis, sym means together in Greek. Bio means life. That one you need to memorize. I would keep that in the back of my head. You will see that all the time from now through college, especially if you do anything science related. Bio means life. But that means life together or living together. And as we went through these examples yesterday, we learned pretty quickly that a lot of animals live together and they have these relationships, don't they? Some of them are very awesome. Some of them, one animal thinks it's super awesome. I'm not even sure the other animal even knows that there's a relationship. And then there's that one relationship where it's actually kind of bad for one of them and really good for the other one. So let's take a look at those, kind of refresh these in our brain. Because these were a little tough. I think the 4 toughest words for this week for certain. Commensalism. Say it with me, class. Commensalism. Commensalism is that shark in the remora. And when I think about that shark in the remora, that remora gets a lot of good benefits, right? It lives on the shark. Does anybody mess with it? Nope, because it's on a shark. I mean, if you're bold enough to mess with a shark, then I guess you got it going. Maybe an orca whale, like a killer whale. But I mean, very rarely would he have to worry, right? And when the shark eats, he's super messy. And he gets food everywhere. And they kind of detach from the shark, grab some snacks, and then attach back to the shark, and then they don't do anything else for the rest of the day. Pretty lazy life, right? Pretty laid back and chill. So the thing that we need to remember about commensalism is probably this down here. There's only one animal getting a benefit out of the relationship, but it doesn't hurt the other animal. It doesn't help the other animal. It's just kind of there. The easiest, well, in my opinion, the easiest is mutualism. Mutualism. And we use the clownfish and the sea anemone as our example of that. This is when 2 animals, Fabiana, live together, and they both get something positive. Right? So let's take a bee and the flower. The bee gets pollen from the flower as a source of food, which helps the bee. As the bee flies from flower to flower with all of that pollen all over it, it pollinates other flowers, thus letting the flowers repopulate, which helps the flowers. Both of them win, right? Both of them win. When the oak tree's dropping acorns, the squirrel comes along. He grabs the acorns. He has food. Good for the squirrel, right? He takes some of those acorns and buries them because he's hiding them and storing things for the winter. And he forgets about some of them. That would be me. And then what happens to those that he buries? What happens? They grow into trees, which helps the oak trees, right? Positive relationship for both of them. Mutualism is pretty easy. That is when both things get something positive. The clownfish has a place to live because not many fish can come near the sea anemone without getting stung and they die. And then the sea anemone gets protected from those fish that can come near it, because you saw how angry those clownfish were yesterday, right? Like, they don't like things being around their home. They're not as nice as they are in Finding Nemo. Then there's the gross one that Hunter loves. He won't even look at the picture. He's like, no, I'm not staring at that. That's nasty. Parasitism. That is when you have one organism living in or on another animal, but it causes that organism harm. So the tick gets your blood, good for the tick. It gives you Lyme disease, not so good for you, right? Not so good for you. So parasitism. So we had those 3. We are going to take time not to watch this video because we've already watched this video, but we are going to watch. No, we watched that. That's the guy yesterday that went swimming with the clownfish. We didn't watch that? All right, we'll pause it and watch it in here. Then somebody pause the video. All right, again, so if we look at that change in the learning target, I can identify all the parts of a food chain or a food web. Why do we need to be able to identify them all? In order to be able to tell what's going to happen when one or more parts are changed or affected by something. That's important. Now, I do need you to understand, and this is going to be something, Anna, that comes up all the time. Your first test, I'm not going to be shocked if there's a question that says something kind of like, what's the main source of energy in an ecosystem? Well, the answer is on your screen right now. The main source of energy in an ecosystem, it all starts with the sun. It all starts with the sun, because the sun is what gives those producers the ability to make their own sugars and energy, which then in turn gives energy to the herbivores, and the herbivores then in turn give energy to the carnivores. Things poop, things die, decomposers break it down, release nutrients back into the soil, and all of a sudden the plants are taking those nutrients back up, and we're back at the beginning again, right? Where they're using the sun and nutrients to make energy, and we have that cycle of energy in an ecosystem. So you need to jot this down. It will probably show up that the sun is the main source of energy in an ecosystem. All right, so we know that the sun is the main source of energy, and if you've been paying attention at all in class, hopefully you have, you know that there's one thing in particular that really relies on this abiotic factor. And it's the beginning of the food chain. Okay, now food chain, we know, is the path of energy. That's a vocabulary definition we've had all week. The path of energy, and we have that on our morning work. Grass to deer to bear. Very easy and very simple food chain. But if the sun is not there, then the beginning of the food chain, the grass or the leaves, can't function, because plants need the sun to make their own energy. So technically plants will be the beginning of the food chain, because the sun's not necessarily food, but the sun is the main energy source, like we said on that very, very first slide. We're going to skip past that. Now, there are many times, kiddos, when we look at this food chain and we have to determine, and Jesse and I have already done this once, we have to determine what's going to happen if a certain link in this food chain, so again, sunlight to plant, plant to grasshopper, grasshopper to bird, bird to snake, snake to owl. We have to slow down and say, what's going to happen if a part of this food chain is affected in a negative way? For example, what would happen if the bird population increased? Give me 1 second. So basically what I'm asking is, what's going to happen if the bird population increases? Means to go up. So if the birds go up, what's going to happen? Glenn? That's right. These grasshoppers are going to go down. Why? Because there's more birds in the area. And they're eating more food. Now, if there's less grasshoppers, guess what's going to happen? More grass. Right? And so it could really change things in that ecosystem. And that's what I mean by our learning target. I can identify all the parts of the food chain or the food web, and I can tell you what's going to happen if a certain thing happens in that food chain. Now, I know when you look at these slides, especially if you're at home, it's really easy to kind of be like, well, that's the same slide, Mr. Bullens. You didn't change anything. Oh, but I did. You have to be very, very careful, because this one says, what would happen if a drought hit this ecosystem? And that kind of throws a brand new vocabulary word in there for us, and that word is drought. What does drought mean? Well, that means that there's not a lot of rain. If there's not a lot of rain, kiddos, the first thing affected, your plants are going to go down, because they are the first thing that needs watered. Everything needs water, but that's going to go down. If plants go down, there's not a whole lot of food for grasshoppers. If there's no food for grasshoppers and they go down, then that means the birds have less to eat. If the birds have less to eat and they either move or they die off, then there's less for the snakes to eat. And if there's less for the snakes to eat, they die or move, and then there's less for the owls to eat. And you can see how drought could really devastate a food chain in an ecosystem. Don't stress too much about the different things that change in the food chains and food webs. That's going to be a huge thing that we're going to work on after we take our quiz and going into next week. But we need to talk about food webs. Sometimes it's not this easy chain of grass to deer to bear. Sometimes the food chains overlap. And you can kind of see in here, there's more than one animal eating the grass. Rabbits eat the grass. This vole eats the grass. And then there's more things that eat these animals as well. Like this fox will eat a vole, but so will this owl, and so will this hawk. Like, it just depends on what you're looking at when we're looking at things of this nature. So food webs are overlapping food chains. And it's going to be very simple. Like, Food webs are going to have those same types of questions. What's going to happen if this happens? And again, we will start breaking those down at the end of our time. So let's stop this so we can upload the video.